Hello, and welcome to the ABCs of Software Requirements. My name is Alex Larson, and I'm a Principal Business Analyst at Magenic. You can find me on Twitter at AlexAnalyzeThis, and if you'd like to tweet about this presentation, please use the hashtag RexABC. First, a little bit about myself. I went into anthropology in college to better understand people, how they relate to each other, and how cultures emerge and are reproduced. And as I entered the business world, I learned that companies operate a lot like societies and cultures. And I've been able to apply a lot of my training as an anthropologist to my career as a business analyst. I started my technical career when I became a tech support technician for Netscape on Windows 95. And after that, I became a network engineer, but I was spending a lot of time on a provisioning software that we had that wasn't doing what we needed as users. I was spending a great deal of my time teaching developers what we really needed as users and why. And my manager recommended I apply to a job as a business analyst. And ever since, about 15 years later, I've been using my powers for good and for awesome. I'm also an animal lover. I like to say I was raised by wolves, not literal wolves, but Irish wolfhounds, so expect to see a lot of cute animal pictures in this presentation. Here is a brief overview of the topics I'll be discussing. Anthropology, business analysis, and Conway's law are three domains that can help you understand business problems and create quality requirements for your solutions. I'll give you some insights and tips on how they can help. Getting accurate and relevant requirements for a project is a common problem. So common a problem, in fact, there's a comic generator for it. If it were easy to translate the needs of systems users to the people who create those systems, I wouldn't have the career I have today as a business analyst. It's a full-time job getting requirements right, and you need a special set of skills. It's easy to see that the customer really wanted a tire swing from the right-hand side of the comic, but when you're articulating what you need as a business user to technical teams, it can be hard to explain. So what the customer explained and then how it was interpreted by different areas of the team, in fact down to the billing department, can often lead to a missed requirement or something that wasn't expected. If it were easy to translate the needs of systems users to system creators, I wouldn't have the career I have today as a business analyst. It's a full-time job getting requirements right. So why should we care about getting quality requirements for our projects? Well, they're a key source of project failure. When surveyed, 78% of executives feel that their businesses usually or always out of sync with project requirements. And less than 20% of those same executives felt that the business requirements process was really articulating their needs. So that tells us that requirements aren't really doing their job. And there's a frequent disconnect between what's needed and what's produced in a software project. And the requirements are the first place you can fix that. It's also the least expensive place to fix it. If you want to put a window in your house, it's better to do it when the house is being designed on paper than after it's already been built. There's a lot of different ways that we can document requirements. It depends on what process you're using or methodology for your software delivery, and it depends on what the teams really need. Traditional waterfall projects often use a business requirements document or a BRD. It's a long, detailed document that describes all of the functionality needed for the solution. Some teams use use cases as a way to describe interactions between users and systems, or systems and other integrated systems. User stories are the most typical way to document requirements in agile methodologies such as Scrum. I tend to prefer user stories over large requirements documents because it keeps the user and their needs centered as the focus of the requirements. When we understand what the user is trying to accomplish in regards to requirements, we can make smarter decisions in our solutions. All requirements can benefit from having diagrams and supporting documentation, like process flows, wireframes, data dictionaries, business rules, the list goes on. But having those different types of artifacts related to your requirements can accommodate different learning styles and can help teams achieve consensus quickly. One of the most frequently asked questions I get as a business analyst is what makes a good requirement? And I tend to respond that you need to invest in your requirements to make them easier to understand, estimate, develop, and test. You want your requirements to be independent because those dependencies can make the requirement hard to implement. If you're reliant on another piece of functionality, or you can't fully test something that you've implemented, that means you've got too many dependencies. All of your requirements need to be negotiable. This means that larger requirements maybe need to be split up, or you could combine similar functionality into a single requirement. And it also lets your developers take some creative approaches for solving problems. You always want your requirements to be valuable because nobody likes to develop something that no one ever uses, and it's costly to a business to have things built that they never need. You want to be able to estimate your requirements because if something is too complex, you're not going to be able to understand how long it takes for you to complete. If your requirements are too complex to estimate, you'll need to break them down into something more manageable. This leads us to the next item, which is small. You want to make sure that your requirements are small enough so that you can actually finish something within a set time frame. Especially with an agile project, you want to be able to fit your implementations into sprints of usually 1 to 2 weeks. If something's too large, you won't be able to finish. Finally, you'll want to be able to prove that your solution is working the way it's expected to. That means that all of your requirements need to provide enough information so that whoever is testing your system can try to exercise all of its functionality. I want to cover some of the unique features of a user story that's used in an agile development project. User stories have specific story language that help describe the who, the what, and the why of a piece of functionality. User story language is typically phrased as a user, I want to accomplish some activity in order to achieve some business value or a goal. That user role describes who it is who's wanting to accomplish something, what it is that they're trying to do, and why they should be doing that. You also have acceptance criteria. They help articulate what must be true about the solution in order to consider the functionality complete and sufficient. It's how you know if your work is acceptable to your business stakeholders. Here is where you use that invest model, and you invest also time, detail, and effort in collaboration. Communicating with developers, QA testers, stakeholders, business users, all of that is key to knowing how much detail is necessary in the acceptance criteria. Now that we've talked a bit about what requirements are, let's talk about how anthropology and its concepts can help. It's a mindset as much as it is an approach. Because anthropology, as Margaret Mead said, demands the open mindedness with which one must look and listen, record in astonishment and wonder that one would not have been able to guess. This is true also of business requirements. You never know what business folks will tell you when you start to talk to them about what their systems do today, how they have to work around them, and then what they'd really love to have happen. So you might be asking yourself, what? Anthropology. It's the social science that's the study of humankind. One of the branches of anthropology, called cultural anthropology in the US, is focused on the cultures and customs of individuals and groups. Corporations have culture too. So when you hear us talking about corporate culture, it's actually more true than you'd think from a disciplinary standpoint of an anthropologist. For example, one company I worked for didn't use departmental names when referring to the teams where they worked. Instead, they used the name of their leader. When you met someone you didn't know in the organization, you would trace your leadership chain back to a common leader you both knew. This mirrors the kinship patterns of cultures who trace their ancestors to common relations when they meet somebody distantly related. Taking an anthropological approach to examining corporate culture is like applying systems thinking to organizations of people, like you would to a technology solution. Understanding project contexts is a great first step. What does this business hope to accomplish with the project? Do they want to make more money, enter a new market, maybe be more competitive, or avoid regulatory sanctions? Often the answers to these questions of what spurred the project in the first place can point to other questions of office politics. Many of us have probably experienced what it's been like to have an executive who is an influencer in the organization champion a project that maybe wasn't important for other people. We went ahead and built it anyway because a key influencer thought it was important to the business. Knowing who these influential people are will help you navigate the politics of your office as you continue to work on your project. Finally, the values of an organization, like their beliefs and norms of how they work, are going to emerge as you ask questions about why we're engaging in any kind of software development project. You'll learn more about the motivations of the business teams, the vision and strategy of the business itself, and ways that technology can help make a difference. One of the ways that we can align anthropology with business requirements is through ethnography. So, what is ethnography? It's the scientific description of the customs of individual peoples and cultures. This method of documenting a culture is similar to documenting the behaviors of users and systems. Both of these things describe who, what, and why of a situation. Just like with an ethnography, you have collaborators from your culture that you're studying who help you as an anthropologist to gain an insider view of their cultural structures and behaviors. With requirements, your subject matter experts are your collaborators, and they give you an insider view of the daily life of the users in their organization. Your subject matter experts can help you understand what's important to them as a system user. What workarounds do they use because their systems don't meet their needs? What are things that they like about the system that they want to keep? And what would they love for it to do that it's not doing for them today? Finally, taking a cue from user experience practices, you can humanize the information you get from your SMEs by creating personas. Personas abstract the wants and motivations of a group of users into a single relatable personality. Anthropologists do something similar with their collaborators in order to protect their privacy while still representing their insights. We call those composites. A component of ethnography is participant observation. The principles of a participant observer can help you in requirements definition. Anytime you can shadow users as they demonstrate how they use their systems, what their challenges are, and what the goals of their processes are, you get valuable information that you can't get from interviews alone. You can try doing the things that the users say they need to do in the system yourself and see where you struggle. Using a beginner mindset means you get a chance to be a toddler at work. You get to ask why repeatedly over and over, and ask questions all the time about how to understand the work lives of your SMEs. While taking some notes is useful, what's more important is being engaged and actively listening to your SMEs. This is a key step to establishing trust and rapport. If you're concerned about being able to capture everything that someone says, ask if they mind being recorded, even just on audio. That can help you go back later and remember all of the nuance of the conversation you had. The concept of self and other comes from anthropology's problematic history of colonialism. However, we can reclaim some of the utility from the concept when thinking about software projects. Defining of the self requires also defining the other. Who is part of an in-group versus an out-group in your projects? This comes down to who are the customers or users of a system and who are not. What areas of the business benefit from this system and which ones don't? For example, I worked for a financial services company that wanted to automate a remittance payment process. And the payment processing staff had their jobs changed from 1 to 2 problem cases a day to all problem cases all day. That affected their job satisfaction. So, thinking about teams and projects from an in group and out group, or self and other perspective, can help you gain an understanding of your teams, your projects, and your companies. It can also give you insight to scope of a project. What is included in the project and what is not. And explicitly stating those things help team members stay focused and remember the goals of the project. Let's move on from anthropology to discuss business analysis. First, let's talk about what a business analyst does. Business analysts are typically described as the people who document requirements for a software development project, but there's more to the role than that. Business analysts often act as a liaison between different teams and different individuals. They can also serve as a diplomat to help teams gain consensus and facilitate conversations around conflicting requirements and priorities. Business analysts can engage in tactical analysis on a project, defining the scope and the requirements for just one effort, or they can apply their analytical prowess to strategic questions on behalf of a whole enterprise. For example, this kind of strategic analysis, sometimes called enterprise analysis, can be used to help a business determine the vision and direction the business as a whole needs to take. Or it can determine what products might need to be developed in order to meet the business goals. Let's talk first about what it's like to be a diplomatic liaison as a business analyst. Business analysts are closest to the business teams on a project and act as translators between technical and business lingo. Establishing trust and rapport positions business analysts in that trusted advisor role so many consultants seek. We advocate for the business needs, reminding development teams we aren't making software just for software's sake, but instead to serve the people using the software to solve a problem. As business analysts, we also educate our business teams on the process of software delivery and can explain technical constraints or the details of a solution to stakeholders so the developers don't have to. As mentioned earlier in the Self and Other section, knowing what your project is important, but also knowing what it is not can be vital. Requirements are not laying around waiting to be gathered. They have to be drawn out of subject matter experts, stakeholders, and users. This is why you'll hear me saying eliciting requirements instead of gathering them. Especially in an agile environment, you don't have the luxury of months of time to spend on requirements definition. To keep the development team fueled up with requirements, you need to provide just enough detail to satisfy the team in just enough time to avoid downtime. You also want to avoid getting so far ahead that the business changes before the requirements ever get a chance to be implemented. Requirements are more of an art than a science. They'll never be completely done, so you just have to stop working on them. And remember that done is better than perfect. Let's talk a little bit more about the differences between strategic and tactical analysis. Strategic analysis, as I mentioned, called enterprise analysis, is done at an enterprise level, and it does more to question the status quo of an organization. It relies more heavily on the influencing skills of the business analyst, who often doesn't have the authority in an organization to mandate that changes occur. Tactical analysis is done at the project level and focuses on finding efficiencies within the scope of the project. BAs offer options for stakeholders to choose from rather than strongly advocating for a specific direction, as is more common at the strategic level. BAs earlier in their careers are often more tactical, focusing on project level work. Some BAs grow into a more strategic direction as they gain experience and try to influence and solve problems further upstream in the process. Let's discuss now the concept of Conway's law. Melvin Conway was a computer scientist, programmer, and hacker who observed in the 1960s that organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of these organizations. Even though requirements describe system functionality executed by machines, the requirements are still a product of people and organizations. How a team is organized influences how they think and approach their work. How companies are organized does the same at a macro level. Remember, people are the core of any project, and people will more often than not approach their projects with ideas and patterns that are familiar to them. Paying special attention to how people communicate will illuminate realities about how your project may proceed. Does a stakeholder always look to someone else before answering a question? Does the operations team always ask for what they think they could get rather than what they really need? These are people-centric clues, how the project may play out, so you oughter pay attention to them. Here are some tips on understanding organizational structures, which Conway's law says will influence your project. Org charts can be useful for understanding power dynamics in an organization. Escalation paths give you another perspective on how authority and accountability is distributed across an organization. Knowing who the influencers and decision makers are in an organization will give you insight into who may need to be influenced in turn. Informal networks are invaluable in the workplace because they're often how folks get their day-to-day work done. As a business analyst, I rely on finding out the names of the people my SMEs rely on to do their jobs, because those people may have more insights for me about what is working or not working in their process and systems. These artifacts may provide more clues to how people and teams are organized and communicate, which will then in turn inform how they create products and software. Let's summarize what we've covered here. Anthropology's concepts of participant observation, ethnography, and the self-other distinction can help you understand the context of your projects and establish rapport with your teams. Business analysis is performing the emotional labor of building trust while using the INVEST model and user story language to improve the quality of your requirements.
Finally, Conway's Law reminds us how organizations of people can influence the organization of products, projects, and software. If you have questions about this presentation, I'm all ears. Find me on Twitter at AlexAnalyzeThis and use the hashtag RexABC to ask your question, and I'll do my best to respond. I hope you've learned a little bit about how anthropology, business analysis, and Conway's Law can help you improve your software requirements. And now, onward to victory!